Welcome to Happy Talks with Dr. Alice and Donovan. Dr. Alice Fong is a holistic naturopathic doctor and founder of Amor de Soi Wellness. And Donovan Jensen is a software engineer and founder of HowToHappy.com. Together, they're out to cause more happiness in the world.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Happy Talks. My name is Dr. Alice, and this is my awesome co-host, Donovan. And today we are talking about ways to support the mental health of your loved ones. So, Donovan, what are your initial thoughts when it comes to supporting a loved one who might be struggling with their mental health?
Yeah, so there's a couple things that came to mind right off the bat. One is sort of the starting point for the person, which is to say that depending on whether it is some sort of transient thing, like, oh, they've worked themselves into a position where they're really stressed out,
Right.
or if it's some sort of like baseline thing where it's like
Right.
this person has depression and or anxiety or sort of a mental health struggle that is going to be carried with them their entire life. Like the difference between those two categories, it makes a big difference in the way that you can be the most helpful. Another thing that I'm sort of thinking of off the top of my head is I have seen a lot of people, and I have also personally been part of getting sort of sucked into feeling responsible for the mental health of those around me. In my family, there are quite a few people with mental health concerns, and there have been times where I feel very, very responsible. And having gone through that over many years, realized more and more that it's less about, oh, I can do this, this, and this, and they're for sure going to feel better or whatever else. It's about sort of setting an environment and that's conducive to mental health and well-being, and hoping that sort of their choices and genetics and whatever else is at play sort of align with the environment that I've set up. Those are some of my initial thoughts. I'd be curious what you have on your end.
Yeah, I definitely agree that it's important to kind of distinguish the difference between someone who has like a mental health condition versus just they're maybe going through just a temporary crisis, and it's very stressful. Because I mean, I've been in both situations, but I think the biggest thing that I have learned, another thing I do agree with you is like realizing that you can only do so much. And yes, you can try to make a difference and help, but at the end of the day, it's really on them to get that help, or receive that help in a way. But the biggest thing that I thought of when we are discussing this topic was realizing that I needed to get out of a fix it mode into more of just being there mode. And and it's kind of, you have to feel out what it is that they're needing at the time. I tend, as a doctor, I'm a fixer. I give suggestions and recommendations, and oh, you have this problem, I can give you like a million solutions. I've done all these things for myself. You should try this and this and this. And that doesn't always go over so well. Sometimes they're not in the space to hear those suggestions, and so it's kind of getting a sense and really listening to them just to be heard, and not try to like give them like a thing to do, because they might not be in the mental space to be like, I can't even get out of bed kind of mood. So realizing and kind of assessing like what is it that they need. I think everyone, like, when in doubt, always go with help them feel heard and validated in their emotions, and not like wrong or bad for feeling what it is that they're feeling. And if they're open to receptive to receiving suggestions or recommendations, or if you're not sure, you can ask, is it okay if I recommend something? So it's clear whether or not it's yes or no. And they can always say no. Give them that space to say no too, and not make them feel guilty if they choose not to do it. Then yeah, that can really go a long way with supporting them.
Yeah, sort of in the same vein, I found it useful to distinguish sort of the depth of their experience to figure out sort of what's most useful in the moment. So for example, my mom has depression on and off. And when she is actively feeling sort of depressed, right, when she's like, I don't want to get out of bed or whatever else, the list of things that are helpful or useful to provide is different than if she's feeling fine. And then we want to work on more of these like preventative or things that make it less likely that this is going to happen in the future. So I've found that also, like you were saying, like listening, this is the part I wanted to key in on. In the moment when things are really rough, the people may not have sort of good ideas or be able to think clearly enough to articulate what would be useful to them. So it's really useful when they are feeling good to ask sort of, hey, when you're feeling this way, what is the most useful thing for me to do? What's the best way for me to be helpful? I found that that's really useful because oftentimes I can speak from personal experience. When I'm feeling fine and rational and clear-headed and whatnot, when I'm feeling depressed, what's most useful for me is just sort of presence, not any sort of action or anything. But when I'm not feeling good, if someone comes and says like, what do you need? Do you want me to stay here or not? I will just say, I don't care. And I will just say that over and over again. And it's not accurate to what is going to be most useful to me in the moment. So just sort of having those conversations outside of the most intense periods can be helpful for finding things that are actually useful.
Yeah, that's a good lesson to remember, that it's different. Like how I'm feeling when I'm depressed is a lot different. And what you say to me, I'm definitely not receptive generally to any type of like fix it, helpful suggestions. I'm just like, and if you are trying to do that, then I'll probably want to try to get away most likely. Versus, although then I was just thinking, am I receptive to that? I mean, maybe I'm more receptive if I'm in a better mood, feeling good. But even then, I don't generally, if it's like unwarranted or if it's just like someone I don't have a super close relationship with, then I have that trust. Because I'd be a little off put if they were like, oh, well, you're depressed, then you should do this like thing. So it's really, I think it does depend relationship to relationship, but if you get a sense that you are trying so hard to make the difference for your loved one and it's not really making the difference, I think like defaulting back to just like being there as someone to have them feel heard and seen, I think can go a really long way.
Yeah, and I just wanted to delve in a little bit more on one of the pieces around sort of, or just provide another example, I guess. But like when I was having a lot of anxiety, right, in the beginning, if I was in the middle of a panic attack or high anxiety and you came and said, hey, what you need to do is some breathing exercises to work down your anxiety and calm down.
Right.
I wouldn't have been very receptive to that. But if I had been in a slightly more calm place, which is like, even towards the end of the day after having a panic attack or something like that, something where I could think more clearly. And someone came to me and said like, okay, next time you have one, here are some of the things. I mean, obviously you would want to open the conversation, like seeing if the person is receptive and whatnot. But basically, like when I didn't have the tools, I wasn't able to get the tools, right? And getting a suggestion for the tool was not useful. But knowing what the problem was and then moving into a space where I could get the tools, then the information was more useful. And then I would say, in the future, if I am experiencing one of these things and someone came and said, hey, these are the steps that we talked about or whatever else, then that might actually be useful. And for me, one of the examples is like, if I'm feeling really down, one of the things that is very likely to be able to at least get me to like a functional state is going out for a walk. I never want to do it ever when I'm feeling down. So, but I know in my head, if I force myself to do it, there's a very, very good chance that I'll feel better afterwards. But I think that's one of the examples of like, if it's something that's new or that you haven't developed tools around or whatever else, trying to provide help in that moment, probably not going to help that much. But if you've sort of talked about it outside of the context of those bad times and then bring it back up, it may be more useful and feel less oppressive, right? In the same way that you were saying, like if somebody just showed up and was like, do this and this and this, if you're feeling shitty, like you're just going to be like, just get out of my face. Like I don't want this right now. But if you had already talked with that person about like, here are the things that I think I need to do, or that I know I need to do, or whatever else. And then they remind you of that in the moment. You may still feel resistant, but I would imagine you're going to be a lot more open than you would be otherwise.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I want to add, because, there were various points that my parents were struggling with their mental health. And I came from like a fix it type of attitude, and they wouldn't listen to me ever. But, just from my own personal experience, what kind of actually got through, I mean, they recognize that, they're really struggling and they probably need help, but like seeking it out or taking my recommendations, just it wouldn't happen. They were resisting hard, and probably the more that I pushed, the more that they resisted. So what I discovered though, was just, one, listening to them so they feel completely heard and understood, and maybe reiterating kind of what they're saying to me. So I kind of really fully get them, and maybe even asking, like, do you feel like I really got you, or is there anything else that you want to share so I can really fully understand your situation? So fully getting them for one, but then the other place is like, what helped with me and my dad when he was going through something was like actually sharing. And this is, I think it's like, I'm not going to say this is, you should do it 100% of the time with 100% of the people. It really is situational. It depends on your relationship and who you're talking to. But what helped with my father was to actually like, I did the best that I could, and I was making all sorts of recommendations. I was listening to him. I was like doing all these things, and it just was not quite making the difference that I was hoping. And so it's just kind of like coming to accept that, he's going to do what he's going to do, and he has to choose to get that help or not. But the other thing was that I told him that the impact on me of me having to resolve the conflicts between him and my mother was like really paying a toll. And, the reason I'm able to be the mediator, even though I don't necessarily want to, is because I worked a lot on myself in personal development and therapy and courses and books and all sorts of things to develop these tools so I can understand both perspectives instead of being like playing the you're right, you're wrong game. And so it's like, and you can develop these tools, and it's really, it's paying a toll. And I think it's like him getting that he didn't want to weigh his own daughter down because he was loving, and also coming from a place of love. And that was helpful when I was dealing with my mother, of just like, I'm not recommending this because I think you're broken. I'm recommending this because I love you, and it just hurts my heart to see that you are in pain. So please, do this because I just can't bear to see you in pain, kind of a thing. So I mean, those were just some things I wanted to share about my own personal experience with loved ones in my family. But again, it's kind of situational, and I don't want to come from a place of like, it's got to be authentic. You don't want to like just say it and be kind of manipulative in a way. It's like, if you really love them, come from a real place of love and care, and not just being like trying to get them to do something, not being like, oh, well, if I tell them I love them, then they'll do the thing that I want them to do, kind of a thing.
Yeah, I think that attaches nicely into a piece of, well, first of all, you can provide whatever resources you want or recommendations or whatever, like you said, and whether or not they take it is sort of up to the individual, and finding a way to not feel responsible, even though it can be really heavy in certain situations. It can be hard.
Yeah.
But it's definitely one of the pieces to like work out for yourself while you're trying to support
Right.
others. Another piece sort of attached onto that is, and you sort of mentioned it, but a lot of people look at sort of their mental health differently than say their physical health, right? When somebody has something like a broken arm or something, it's very easy for most people to say like, oh, these are the steps I need to take to go through and sort of heal this thing or get it back up to whatever shape I can get it into.
Right.
When it comes to mental health, a lot of people have these sort of mental models or frames around just like being weak or broken or not good enough, or sort of these models that are a lot less useful and a lot less helpful, and can cause a lot of resistance around sort of taking the actions that are needed to solve whatever the underlying problem is. So, it may not just be, or at least I've found that it's not always a simple, just like, here are the resources, here is exactly what you're supposed to do.
Right.
Sometimes it involves other techniques, like you were saying, like how you were able to sort of show the way that it impacted you, and I was able to move the needle a little bit. Some of the other things I've seen is like people need to see or hear a lot of stories about other people sometimes for it to really click. Sometimes people just need the analogy of like, your brain can end up injured or not functioning correctly in the same way that your body can end up that way. And there are certain, exercises or medicines that you can use to help get those things back on track. I'm sure there are other ways that people tend to do this, but I've seen a lot of times that can be just as difficult or just as much of the work of supporting others is helping them or trying to help them find a different mental model to approach some of these problems, as is the actual set of, sort of exercises or whatever it is that help you move through some of these things.
Right. Yeah. Helping, I think, destigmatize like the view of mental health now, and that there's nothing wrong with getting support. Like, yeah, just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not real. The other thing I wanted to add that occurred to me was this idea that sometimes the best way to support the mental health of others is also to support your own mental health, especially if they've been resisting and they're not, like, you feel like you can't make a difference with them no matter how much you like listen to them or share ways to help or just tell them how you're here for them, and it's just like they're still struggling and it's not making the difference, and that's going to pay a toll on your mental health. So getting the support that you need, and maybe working with a therapist or someone else or a coach will maybe give you some like different perspective or ideas on how you can better support your loved one, and that you're supporting yourself. Maybe they can see something that you're not quite seeing. It's maybe like blind to you because you're too close to the loved one to really see, maybe I need to step back and give them some space because I've been super pushy or really like in their face about getting help. And that doesn't seem to work. And maybe it helps to have like an outsider kind of share what they think of the situation if you share it with them.
Yeah, it's definitely important that you are coming from a stable place, because depending on what the relationship is and how serious their struggles are, you can find yourself with your own mental health struggles really quickly. On sort of a related note, another thing that is really useful if the dynamics allow for it is basically figuring out how you can help the people around the person that you're trying to support that person as well. So let me make that more tangible, because that sounded like it didn't make any sense. My sister, for example, has a number of mental health struggles that she has on and off. And like we've talked about, I've spent a good amount of time trying to sort of like understand different types of mental health problems, how to, help people deal with them, whatever else. My dad, on the other hand, historically, he's not this way anymore, but in the past, I would feel depressed, or my sister would feel depressed, or someone would feel depressed, and he would like be like, well, what are you doing? You're lazy. Get up, do something. And, one of the most useful things that I could do for my sister and did do in the past is sort of help him understand the dynamic and the relationship and the things that are helpful and not helpful and all these other things to create a more supportive general environment. And depending on, the context and who's involved and whatnot, that can actually sometimes be the most impactful thing that you can do, because the individual by themselves may or may not do certain exercises. But if you have, one person supporting you and 5 people beating you down around you, you're still going to have quite an uphill battle. So if there are things that you can do to sort of tweak the environment around them in whatever way that means to sort of support their mental health, that can be really useful. And then, of course, you can share with them sort of like the ways you had these conversations or whatever else, so that they're more equipped with these tools. But still, I've found that that can be one of the strongest ways to sort of support the mental health of your loved ones.
Yeah, that makes total sense. It didn't even occur to me, but yeah, I think when someone's feeling alone and isolated, and it's tough to be like their if you were their main sole support in the family and they don't feel comfortable talking to others. I mean, I actually was that person. I feel like for everyone in my family, I'm that person that they talk to about what's going on with them on an emotional level, maybe because of my training or just because I just listened. I don't know, but that's who I was for my family. But I think over time I realized that it'd be helpful if other members of my family developed some of these skills or just kind of helped or just even like learn to understand other perspectives and understand and just not come from a place of like, oh, you're so wrong for doing it this way. Like when my mom and sister would get in conflicts about how she was parenting, things like that, and I would try to help my mom understand, my sister Helen has it really hard and this is what it's like and she's dealing with this and you didn't know what was going on. And then I'd tell Helen like, oh well, mom is dealing with this issue and so maybe she said something because she was kind of emotional from this other thing. So kind of like helping smooth the tension when there is tension, because that can be a source of conflict and therefore mental health in within a family.
Yeah. In addition to just sort of those, you know, misunderstandings or not having the full story about
Right.
individual like circumstances, there is also, it's pretty common for people to have just really wrong views on particular mental health problems, right? Like for the depression thing where it's like being lazy and being depressed are not the same thing.
Right.
But if you haven't had any experience with it and you haven't had any chance to sort of or reason to sort of learn about the details and the nuances, or same thing with like anxiety versus an actual panic attack, right? Like if you haven't seen these things or been exposed to them, it's very easy to just sort of like lump all of this stuff together, or to have sort of these misunderstandings based on your experience, or other people based on their experience, that like, oh, they say they're having anxiety, I've had anxiety before, like whatever, or like they say they're depressed, I've been sad, like just get over it, get up and get some stuff done. Those mental models on top of misunderstandings or not having the full picture or whatever else can really cause some, I don't know if I want to say toxic, that's the word that comes to mind. I mean, I guess it is toxic as the outcome, but it's not intentionally toxic, right? It's just a misunderstanding of how things sort of work or what's useful. I'm going to go back to this lazy example, but it's like, in my dad's head, in his experience, when he's not feeling up to doing something, it's generally because he needs a boost of motivation, a kick in the pants, something to like tell him like
that worked for him.
Hey, you need to go get some stuff done. So someone like razzing him a little bit is helpful. So then he's using sort of that same tool in a situation where it's not, because in his head they were the same thing. He understands the difference now. But in the same way, like it's extremely common for that to happen. And anywhere that you can bridge any of those gaps, and what we've been talking about before too, as far as like listening and figuring out what people actually need, is going to be very useful. Because when it comes to mental health problems and conditions, a lot of times your individual experience isn't necessarily as useful as it is in a lot of other situations, right? Like if you say you're sad and I say I'm sad, we're probably roughly talking about the same thing. But if you say, you're having like schizophrenic paranoia, and I've never experienced that before, then the gap in experience is probably quite large. And I only say that because it seems like people who don't have experience with the exact same sort of mental illness generally have a hard time conceptualizing it. And for me personally, having had periods where I had, for example, I never had a panic attack before, and then I did have one, right? That was like a moment of great understanding for me, the gap in sort of those two experiences, because it's not really the same thing. It's entirely different. So it can be hard to digest and understand fully outside of having had that experience yourself. And for a lot of people, even the things that we label sort of the same, manifest differently or with different sets of problems. So like depression for me comes out as anhedonia, or just like I don't care about anything. I just don't find nothing sounds nice. I don't want to do anything.
Yeah.
For other people, it can come as a really deep and profound sense of sadness. And those are different experiences that live under the same name.
Right. And I know just from my own personal experience that it really varies even within myself. Like there's the moments of like, oh, I don't feel like doing anything versus like I feel like a worthless piece of shit. Like it's different experiences of being sad or depressed in a way. So and it's really hard to say like, you know, if your loved one is in a particular state or the degree of what they're dealing with at that time without just like listening to where they're at. I did think of just one other maybe recommendation on when you're dealing with a situation and you're not quite sure like where they're at or what they're needing, because you know maybe what they need like changes. Like I know sometimes I need something different at different points of, you know, my mental health struggles. And so for sometimes I just want someone to, and I think this goes back to like, you know, asking them what they want. And sometimes they have like no idea, or they don't even have the mental capacity to like suggest an idea. And so maybe you can throw out ideas like, oh, would it be helpful if we went on a walk together? Or what if I just, you know, you don't have to do anything. I'll just sit here and just be here for you. And if you want to talk, great. If you don't, that's okay too. Like give that as an option. Or it's like, or do you want me to like completely distract you from what it is that's causing you to stress, and we can go like mini golfing or something like totally different to take your mind off this thing that's causing you such distress. Like maybe that's what they're needing. Or do you want to like really talk about it like seriously, like let's go through it so I really get it. So, you know, throw out a few options. There are options, and you know maybe they're not in the mental space to know what it is that they want, but just, you know, throw it out and see if they pick one. And if not, just let them know that you're here for them. And you know, if they want to take on one of those things that you recommended later or suggested, that can be an option too.
Yeah, and I want to really highlight how much more useful that approach is than just telling people what to do. Because
Yeah.
I feel like that's a very, very common go-to for people is
Yeah.
like, oh, you're having anxiety, you need to meditate. Go meditate.
Go meditate.
And depending on the person and where they're at and all that stuff,
Mhm.
not only may it not be helpful, and it probably won't be,
Right.
but it could also be more stressful and make it worse instead of better, which, you know, runs counter to what we're talking about today.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I was just thinking of like a few different scenarios. Like when I found out that my friend had committed suicide, I did not want to talk about it. I did not want to hear any suggestions. All I wanted was just to be like held and be like shut the fuck up, basically. Just like shut the fuck up and just hold me. That's all I need. And maybe some alcohol. but when it was my miscarriage, which was obviously another emotionally distressing event that happened to me, I didn't want to talk about it initially, but then I came to realize that no, I do need to talk to someone who's been through it, and that actually is what I needed at the time. So I didn't really know. I can't really say like, oh, in this type of scenario, do this, because that even fluctuated with the same scenario. Like there's moments in my miscarriage I didn't want to talk about it at all, and there's moments where I really needed to talk to someone. So it's just like, you know, just let them know that you're there for them. If you want to talk, I'm here. If not, totally cool. I'm still here. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know of any situations where that sort of presence, right, or availability makes things worse. You may not be able to help. They may not have
Right.
a good idea, or you may not be able to think of something that they actually think would be useful.
Mhm.
But I don't know of any scenarios where sort of the presence is
Mhm.
a problem or makes things worse. Or if it is, most people are at least able to communicate that much, which is to say, like, I want to be alone right now.
Right. Yeah.
So that strategy I found is generally pretty safe.
Mhm. Yeah. Or bring them food. It's usually pretty safe. Like, maybe they don't want to talk, maybe they want to be alone in their room, but bringing them some food shows that you care. I always appreciate that. Yeah. All right. And do you have any final thoughts for this topic, Donovan?
I don't think so. It's just the one last thing to hammer home is just, you can do everything right and the person can still have struggles. So
absolutely,
just keep doing your best to like provide a nice supportive environment, and keep working on that and communicating with them and whatnot, and do your best to not get sucked into the outcome. Obviously, it's really hard when it's people you love and care about,
right.
But ultimately you don't have control over this. You just have influence.
Right. That's such an important point. So I appreciate you ending on that note. All right. Well, that's it for today. We appreciate you. And if you appreciate us, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, all the things that help spread the happiness in the world. And we will see you next time. Bye, guys.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please take a second to subscribe as it really helps out a lot. If you're looking for more content, there's all sorts of information over at howtohappy.com. And if you want something a little bit more condensed and concise, I've also written the book Mindscaping, which is essentially a framework for optimizing happiness. So we'll have the link there as well. And that's all I've got. Thanks again. I'll see you next time.